Hi, in this video I'm going to go over the basics of CRWeld, and I'm going to begin by powering on the system. So I'm going to go to the control box, which is under the table, and I'm going to flip the switch that's next to the AC cord. I'll hear the fans power on, and I can begin seeing a boot up process show on the pendant screen. So as it boots up, it'll say Intel NUC, and then you'll have a purple splash screen displayed for a little while, and probably after about 30 seconds we'll see the official CRWeld pendant GUI turn on. Okay, so now that my pendant is launching, I'm going to go ahead and push the E-stop so I can show you something. So if the E-stop is pressed, either this E-stop or the E-stop underneath the table, once the GUI has launched, you'll see in the bottom left that the robot just appears as a little white collapsed looking robot. So if that's the case, that means that one of your E-stops is pressed or there's a connection failure somewhere. So at any rate, if that's the case, just make sure you release your E-stops, and then after a few moments you'll hear the brakes click off on the robot and you'll see your robot correctly appear in the bottom left corner of your screen. I will discuss the pendant in more detail in the latter half of this video, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about what is currently on the robot. So what we have here is we have a end effector with two handles that allow you to easily grab the robot, and we have a button here on the right that when you press it, you can drag the robot. And then when the button isn't pressed, the robot is locked in place. So you have to press this silver button to be able to move the robot around. And then the other way to move the robot around is by using the joystick. So if you push the joystick, you can rotate the robot by turning, and then you can also translate the robot by pressing. And so there's 6 different ways to move the robot. One thing to note is that you don't want the torch whip to accidentally hit the knob, because it can also push the knob, so it's important to make sure the whip is routed out of the way of the knob. And then the other thing to know is if this button is pressed, the joystick doesn't do anything. Or if a program is running, the joystick doesn't do anything. So those are a few things to know. And then here on the end effector we have 3 buttons. The first one says S/R. That means store recall. So what this button does is it stores an orientation, and then you can recall that orientation. So for example, let's say I want to store this orientation for my weld, just for example. If I want to store it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this button, and when I hear a double beep, that means this orientation has been stored. So if I move the robot, I can recall that orientation by doing a quick press, and the robot will go back to that orientation that was stored. And so I can do this at any time. So for example, I can do this as I'm programming, or I can do it now. I can do it at any point within my programming sequence. It doesn't matter when. But it allows you to store and recall an orientation. So next we have a point button. So the point button is also, I call it the green button because the light turns green when you press it. This button records a point. So as you move the robot around, you can press this point button to record the point, and it stores it to a file. So that's how I store the positions, and then each point can have a corresponding arc state. So for example, if I teach a point, I can either have the arc on at that point, or I can have the arc off at that point. So if I want to teach a weld, what I would do is I would drag the robot to the beginning of my weld. I would first, and the order matters, I would first teach the point, and then I would turn the arc on. And that would signify I'm at the beginning of my weld. And then if I wanted to move to the end of my weld, I'd drag my robot there, I would record that point with the point button, and then I would hit the arc off button to signify that the arc turns off there. And then I could continue to teach the air move points as normal. Alright, so that explains what these 3 buttons do, and then we've explained how these handle works and how the joystick works. So let's go ahead and take a look at how the pendant works. This is the CRWeld pendant, and I'm going to walk you through the different screens and the different tabs and explain the functionality of each one. So to begin, we are on the main run screen. This screen is the one that's shown when the robot boots up, and we also see that we have several different knobs and buttons here. So beginning here on the left, we have a back button. This back button basically is a navigation button. So if I move somewhere, I can click back and get back to my run screen. This knob is a navigation knob. So this allows me to move through my different tabs by clicking and turning the knob, and then I can also press my knob to enter tabs. And then again, I can go back by pressing the back button. Here we have a stop and run button. These are concerning with the robot movement. So if I want to run a program, I can push the run button. And if I want to stop a program, I can push stop. And then also the run serves as a pause button. So if a program is running and I want to pause the robot, I can press pause. And then again, to resume the motion, I can push run again. There's also an adjust button on the right. So this button allows you to change certain values, such as the weld override and then the weld speed itself. So this knob here just to adjust that value. Okay, and then we have an e-stop here, and if you press this, it cuts power to the robot. Okay, so let's start going over these main tabs. So this is our main set of tabs, and we have the Run tab, Weld tab, Program, Settings, Monitor, Power. So that's all the tabs for this main menu. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over each one of these, and I'll give you a brief description of what they do, and then I might go back and go into more detail on some of these tabs. So the Welding tab allows you to set configurations that concern with welding. So if I want to enter my welding tab, I'll press my navigation knob, and this brings up a list of sub-tabs that each allow me to configure something to do with welding. So for example, if I wanted to change a dwell, I would go over to my dwells, press it, and I could change either my start or end dwell. So if I wanted to change my start dwell, I'd adjust the value, and then I'd confirm that by pressing, and then I can get back to my previous menu by pushing back or pushing the back button here. So I'm back on my weaving tab, or my welding tab, excuse me. So there's a few other functions I should go over. So the most important one is the arc safety. So arc safety, if the border is green, that means that the robot will not weld. The welding will not be triggered. If I press this, the border turns red, and that means that welding can be triggered. And welding will be triggered in two situations. One, if the robot is running through a program and encounters a weld. And then the other situation is if purge is pressed. So if arc safety is off and purge is pressed, it'll feed wire. And this can be used just to feed wire if you need to clip it, but also this can be used for tacking welds. Arc safety can be turned on and off at any time. So for example, it can be turned on and off during a weld, or it can be turned on and off between welds for safety. So dwells, again, are the amount of time the robot pauses at the beginning and end of a weld. And if you select one of these, you can see in the top right, it has a description of exactly what it does. Weave. So weave lets you configure the different type of functionalities of the weave. And these are a global setting. So whatever you set here gets applied to all weaves throughout your program. So if I were to click on weave, I would see that I can adjust my left, center, and right dwells, as well as my width and my frequency. So let's go back. And then, so that's all of the welding tabs. So let's exit out of that weld menu. So now I'm back on my main menu. So I got my main tabs here. So the next one was program. So program is probably the most commonly used tab. Program lets you choose which program number is selected, the name of the program, and then you can teach points. You can actually teach points at any time just by pressing the buttons on the end effector, but by entering the program tab, you can do a few more advanced features. So I'm going to go ahead and go over these sub menus or these sub tabs. So we have a few of them here. We have delete, edit, function, name, back. Okay, so number is the tab that lets you choose which program is currently active. So if I select, I can change the program number and I can scroll through the list of programs that have been stored. And there are 100 programs that can be stored. And currently there's only a few that are named or actually have points in them. So for example, let's go to program 3. So I'm going to press to confirm that. And let's say I'm starting fresh and I want to create a new program. It's going to be program 3. Well, for example, I could push run and play program 3 because it's stored. But in this example, let's say I want to delete program 3 and start fresh. So what I need to do now that I've selected program 3, I need to delete the current points that are in it. So I'm going to go to my delete tab, enter that, and then I'm going to delete all points. So delete current point would just delete the last point, and then delete all point deletes all 4 points. So I do that and it clears out my program. To go back, I press my back button. Alright, so my next tab is the edit tab. So this is the tab that is useful to be on as you are teaching your program, and that is because it allows you to adjust your weld speed. So if I were to create a program, the first thing I'd do is I'd have a weld speed in mind, so I'd go ahead and set that. And then I would drag my robot to positions and teach a few points. And I'm going to do that now, and you'll see them show up on the screen. And if I want to begin a weld, I teach a point, and then I press my arc button, and I see that an arc has been created. And then I can teach a few points with that arc. And you'll notice that the weld speed 16.5 corresponds to the speed shown here. Of course, it's rounded. But if I change that speed and teach another point, I see that the new speed is displayed. So in this way, as I'm programming my path, I can have different weld speeds for different weld segments, for example. And then all the air moves have the same speed. Alright, so this is essentially the edit page. There's one more feature of this page, and I'll quickly get into it. So it says push to approach nearest point. So at any point I can, or at any point in time, I can push this, and this allows me to step through my program and also to delete points. So if I want to step through my program, the first thing I need to do is click one of these arrows, and it doesn't matter which one, but this is just step forward, for example. And stepping forward or stepping backward will move the robot to the closest point, so the closest point in the program. And then I can again click these buttons, and the robot will move through each one of these points as I click the button. And the reason this is useful is, for example, if I didn't like program, or if I didn't like line 9, I could delete that line. And also, if I wanted to insert something after line 8, I could push the button on the robot and it would insert a new point. So in this way, I can either insert points or delete points. So I'm going to go ahead and exit this edit tab. All right. And so if you're teaching a new program, you should be on this screen. And if you want to edit an existing program, you should be on this screen. And also, if you teach points on any, you can teach points on any screen. It's just helpful to teach them while you're on the edit screen. The next tab is called function. So the green button on the end effector can quickly be pressed to teach a point. But it can also be held for a long press. So if you hold it for over 2 seconds, and that will teach or use one of these functions. So if you, it says this setting determines the function of long pressing the green button on the arm handles. So there's 2 options. Of course, you can either weave. So whenever you do a long press, it'll configure or be set into weave mode. And if you select circle, it'll be in circle mode. So that means if I hold my green button, it'll teach a circle point. So I can teach a circle like that. Or if I'm on weave mode and I hold down my button, it'll say weave move taught. So that's what these two options set. And then I have my name option. So I can name my program whatever I want. And then when I'm happy with my name, I can select enter. And then this name is what shows up, for example, here. All right, so that's all the tabs. So I can go back. And now I'm back at my main menu. These are, again, my main tabs. We just went over weld, we went over program. The next tab that we need to go over is settings. So settings allow you to configure global parameters that deal with the robot. So if I click settings, first off we have level. This is the collision level sensitivity. So the lower this number is, the more sensitive the robot is to a collision. The higher it is, the less the robot is sensitive to a collision. So the only reason I would turn this from 1 is if I was getting collision detections undesirably. So that could be happening if your torch is heavier than expected, or if the arm is reaching significantly far out. You might want to set that to 2 or 3. The next value is max speed. So max speed is the speed used during all the air moves. So if I wanted the robot to move faster between welds, I could turn this up. And if I wanted safer motion, I could turn this down and it'll move slower between all the welds. I can also change the orientation of the robot. This just signifies which way the robot is connected to something. So this first one is floor mounted, that one is wall mounted, and this one is wall mounted. So I'm going to go back to floor. And it's very important that this is set correctly, or else the robot will move erratically when you try to drag it around. So anyways, floor mount is the most common. Tool select, you can have 100 different tools stored. And so typically you might create a new tool if you put a new torch on the robot. So right now we're just using tool 1. But say if you wanted to create a new tool, you would select a new tool, and then go to your calibration tab, and you go through the calibration process. And to go through the calibration process, you have 3 buttons here. You first start your calibration, and then it would show you a series of prompts. It says store 5 points, and then I would use this button to store the 5 points. And then when I was done with that, I would select end calibration. But I'm not going to do that right now. And then we can go back, and this brings me back to all my main tabs. So we went over weld, program, settings. Next we have monitor. So monitor doesn't have any sub tabs. It's just what is shown here. We have 3 timers on the left. The first one is the power on timer. This is how long the robot has physically been plugged into the wall and turned on. Motion time is how much time the robot has spent moving. So this includes all moving. And then arc on time is how long the robot has how long the robot has been welding. How much time the weld has been triggered, essentially. So also here on the right, these are just currents, the joint currents, and that can just be helpful to determine if there's an issue. But usually that's not particularly helpful. And then we have the power tab. So the power tab lets you shut down the robot. So if I were to push the navigation button, it would shut down the pendant after 3 seconds, and then you could switch off the power to the robot. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to press this, and it says program stopped, and then after a few seconds it begins the shutdown process. And then it's important not to turn off AC power until this screen turns black.